Welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where I talk to writers from across the literary spectrum about their work and how they do what they do. For those who don't know, this show is available on both my YouTube channel, which is, of course, have the same name, and in a podcast via all of the major podcast platforms. And you can subscribe to either or both so that you never miss a thing. Regular viewers and listeners will also know the bulk of the authors on this show, they tend to write gritty crime fiction or thrillers or horror. I do have the occasional nonfiction sports author, that kind of thing. But today we're taking on something that's equally scary for a lot of parents, and that is managing your child's first cell phone experience. My daughter is 35, but I remember cell phones were just starting to be a thing when she hit high school, and I can remember being the lame dad because I wanted to get her a pager, right? And anyway, we're going to get into all that. To that end, I'm joined today by Dr. Catherine Pearlman. She is a licensed clinical social worker whose new book is called First Phone, and it comes out on July 26th. First Phone is described as, quote, a fun and informative illustrated kids guide to safely and productively navigating the digital landscape. God knows we need something like this. Catherine, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Well, let's get right into it. I just read the description of the book, but tell me about First Phone, because your specialty is in parenting skills, but I understand that this time you're speaking directly to kids, correct?
That's right. So normally I work with parents to help them improve behaviors or issues that are happening with their kids. A lot of times the best way to improve things is with the parents changing their own actions rather than, working directly with the kids, depending on what the issues are. So I'm always advising parents. I love children, but I mostly work with the adults. But in this case, what I found is that parents were out of their depth, and also kids are getting access even way before their parents get them a cell phone. They have an iPad or a computer, or even what's happening most often is a kid on the bus has an iPhone, or their friend's house has open access. So kids really have to make good decisions for themselves. Even if their parents have the best of intentions, I'm going to hold off till you get a cell phone at 13. That kid has already had open access for like 3 or 4 years by that point. So I thought it was really important to address kids directly with this book.
Well, I definitely understand all of that. Now, your previous book, and for those folks who may have been reading before we went video, when we were just a blog for many, many years, you might have read my earlier interview with Catherine for her first book, which was called Ignore It. It was about child behavioral issues in parenting. And that book was aimed at parents. Was it difficult for you to shift gears this time and redirect your focus to kids instead of the parents? Because as you say, you're used to working more with the adults than with the kids themselves. Was that a difficult transition?
Actually, it's funny. I feel like by accident, I found my sweet spot because, I'm not trained as a writer. I'm a social worker and a therapist. And for me, I've worked over the last decade to become a writer and study writing. I live with my husband, who is a journalist, so he's my editor. And I've learned a lot, but, I'm not a lofty, experienced, trained writer. And so writing for kids actually was wonderful because I think my writing style is a very clear, to the point, kind of practical writing, and that's great for kids. And also, I love talking to kids. Like if I'm at a party and there's a kid in the room, I'm speaking to that kid. So for me, speaking to kids comes easily, and writing to kids actually came surprisingly naturally. I loved it.
Do you anticipate this kind of thing that they'll be reading with parents?
So I designed it in a way that it could go kids. It's fully written for kids. It's illustrated. I have 5 kids in the book that, also talk in their own voices about, their own problems that happen because of their digital access. But I do have a section in the back for parents because the idea is that should be the beginning of a conversation, that it's not just like you're going to get the kid the book and then you're going to give them the phone and then like you're done talking. Like digital education is a lifelong process, and we're still learning. I'm sure you're still learning. Things change all the time. There are new scams. There's a new update. Things happen. And so I want this book to just be the opening conversation, and then for parents and kids to learn to talk to each other about things that happen.
Yeah, you'd note the correlation between the rise in anxiety and depression in kids and the increase in the availability of cell phones and iPads and all kinds of digital devices. Tell me a little bit more about this, because we certainly are hearing a lot more about this. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So it's actually anyone who's working with children, teens in mental health space or in schools, they just know anecdotally, but now we also know from the research that kids are more depressed, more anxious, there's more suicidality than ever before. And, usually there's trends, usually things change over the course of generations. But what researchers noticed is that there was a sharp incline in 2012. And what's interesting about 2012, it was also when, more than 50% of people had smartphones. 75% of kids by 2017 had a smartphone. So 3 out of 4 kids had a smartphone by 2017. That's a lot of kids suddenly having the most powerful digital device on earth. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable what they can do with a cell phone, but it just happened so quickly. So they realize these two things happen at the same time. There has been no causation. So we don't know that cell phones, or what about the cell phones? Is it the social media? Is it just screen time? Is it access to the internet? We don't know. All we do know is that those two things rose at the same time, and that they need to dig deeper into the research and figure out more specifically what it is. But even just research that's designed for teens about how they feel about their phones, there's really strong research that time on cell phone and time on social media greatly negatively affects children's moods. They're more anxious, more depression, less sleep, so on.
Why? So tell me a little bit more too about the research. Where are we seeing this research coming from?
So what's good is there's a lot of research happening, but what's bad is it's still so new. And research has to be, replicated and then slightly changed and deeper with the limitations, and it needs to be replicated in many generations to really understand an issue. But there is some conclusive research that is informative for us. First of all, depending on the study, and there's many studies now, somewhere between 68 and 80% of kids sleep with their smartphones. Now, this is a big no-no for me. So what happens is, and also what's even more crazy is about 30% of those kids are sleeping with their phones on their pillows. So what happens is notifications are going on all night long. This one commented on something on Facebook or liked a TikTok. Some guy you like is texting you. A friend is texting that they have a problem in the middle of the night. So these kids are being woken all night long with their digital device, and they're going to bed so much later. And the first thing that happens to them in the morning is they wake up and they get news on their digital device from their friends. And that is just not a great way to wake up. So what's happening is they're getting less sleep. Now, teens are already sleep deprived in general. So now they're getting less sleep. And we know from like 100 years of research that people who get less sleep have very adverse reactions. Like, lack of sleep is a torture device. So kids are having more anxiety, depression. They're less coping. They can't deal with things in the way that they used to be able to deal with them. Their grades are lower. They have worse concentration, worse memory, more waking. That's just from the sleep loss. And we know that they're having sleep loss because they're sleeping with their cell phone. So all of that means they're less happy, and they're doing worse in school. They're more stressed, and there are all these issues that are arising from the cell phones just from sleeping with your phone.
Well, I was thinking about this over the weekend, and I had a moment, and I was thinking forward to this conversation, and I had a moment. My wife and I were running some errands. We live in a small town outside Sacramento. She was running some errands this direction. I was running some errands this direction. And as I'm walking, every single person, well, that's not probably true, 90% of the people around me were walking toward me, were like this. They had the cell phone in front of their face. I'm seeing people sitting like at coffee shops or cafes, not talking to each other, looking at their phones. I pass people like on the freeway and I'll look over and someone is driving with their phone up in front of their face. I I had two different people swerve into my lane while I was driving somewhere yesterday, and I could see when they went by, both of them had phones in front of them. This feels like an epidemic of distraction that is not just kids, it's everybody. But it seems to me so important that we get to the kids now and get them better tools and ways of dealing with this device, as you say, before they become that adult that walks into a fountain or whatever the heck we see all the time. I mean, I'm walking down the road dodging people and they're not even seeing me as we go by. It was absolutely stunning to me seeing that. So it's a really long-winded way of what are some of the things that you're really hoping parents will take away from this, and maybe what are some of the big mistakes parents are making with their kids as they're introducing these devices into their lives?
So one thing we all have to understand, kids and adults alike, is that these devices, especially social media, but even email, have been designed to gain our attention, right? Everything has a ding, a notification. It's like YouTube and social media, Facebook, they all hone your interest, so they know exactly what content to keep you engaged. So there are all these things that are set up inside this device that make us have difficulty putting it down. It is designed that way. And the more we can kind of understand that, the more we realize we need outside help to manage that kind of addiction epidemic, because it is so hard. My phone rings. It's almost like a Pavlov's dog. Like, I have to look at it, like, what's happening on there. And we've also lost the ability to just sit, to be bored, to be in the doctor's office, to, wait at a light without glancing at our phone. So for parents, I want them to understand this and not blame their kids and not blame themselves, but say, okay, we need to address this kind of addiction and this kind of problem, knowing where it's coming from. So first of all, I have a mandatory no cell phones, computers, iPads charging in the bedrooms. Not for adults, not for kids. That's mandatory. And even sleep experts recommend that people turn off their devices like an hour, at least an hour before bedtime. I try and be strict about that, but I'm less strict about that if I can just get them to keep it out of the bedroom. And I can't even tell you how many parents tell me, oh, but she uses it for her alarm clock. Like, it's like $9 to buy yourself a digital, like, nice alarm clock at CVS. You don't need your phone. And nothing good is happening for kids in the middle of the night on their cell phones. Like, I guarantee not one good thing is happening. The other big mistakes are that parents are not having ongoing conversations. Like, they make the contract of rules when they give the cell phone, and sometimes they have some limitations set up, but they're not actually talking to them about sexting, about porn, about what happens if you get a mean text, what if someone is soliciting you, what about scams and phishing and all of these things that happened on our digital devices. They're not continuing to have these conversations. So I think that's the second mistake. And I think the last big mistake is that parents are too punitive. So they're not actually being instructive. They're not trying to help their kids learn. They take away the phone, they lecture, instead of trying to learn about the realities for kids with their cell phones and then working on ways to manage what those issues are.
Yeah, one of the issues as a reporter that I have covered a lot in recent years, to the point where my head wants to explode sometimes, but it's a really big issue with cell phones, is data privacy. We put so much of our personal information out there voluntarily for these companies to, even if it's not a scam, to just absorb and then to resell, etc. Do you talk at all in the book about the concern for guarding your privacy while you use your phone?
Absolutely. I introduce kids to the idea of data and a digital footprint, so that everything they do online, everything they Google, every click they do on YouTube, everything they click on Facebook, it leaves an imprint that you can never take away. And that, there are some good things about this, like, Amazon will suggest things that you might actually like. YouTube saves you the time and produces content you actually like. But there is a downside to all of that data being out. I always say that, Google and Amazon literally know more about me than my family. I mean, they know everything about what's happening in my brain. And so it's important for kids to know about that, and to be wise about what they click on. And I also talk about, Google is this amazing wealth of information, but it might be something that you're not quite ready to see. And not everything on the internet is true. So there's a lot of being a wise consumer and being thoughtful about what you click on that I do introduce kids to in the beginning. And then, again, it's like a continuation of learning about data and leaving a footprint and privacy. I go over about, what's privacy, and being smart about your password and your information, like your birthday and your social security number and things like that. So I do go over all of that as an introduction for sure.
That's great. That's really important stuff. You also mentioned etiquette, and I think etiquette's a really big thing these days with phones. As I noted, people, not even paying attention to where they're going or whatever. But what we see, and I think I noted it too, it really distresses me when I see people all sitting together or at a table somewhere, and they're all looking at their phones. Tell me a little bit more about what you tell kids about etiquette in regard to their phone.
So I remember one time my daughter, I have an 18-year-old, and she called me and she just started like yelling in the phone. And I was like, let's just try that one more time. Hang up, call me back. Hello, mother. I have a problem I'd like to talk to you about. Click, I hung up. She called me back. Hello, mother. I have a problem I'd like to talk to you about. Like, kids are not learning the basic socialization skills of interpersonal communication because everything is happening on their devices, everything. And so we have to make an effort to teach kids, when is it appropriate to answer your phone? When is it appropriate to leave it? When grandma is visiting for like one day a year, that is not the time you're like on your device, put it down. When you have a friend over, that's not the time you're texting another friend, put it down. So I do talk to kids about, how to answer the phone, how to hang up the phone, when to pick up the phone, when to put the phone down. I also want them to make sure that they do always answer for their parents and their caregivers, but then they don't always answer if it's in the middle of dinner. You should not have your cell phones at the dinner table. And this is also like a wink and a nod to parents. And I tell them at the end of the book, if you want your kids to have good etiquette, you better start showing it. And parents have terrible phone etiquette. It's like a do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. And that's not going to work.
Mo, preach, because let me tell you, it drives me insane. Now I'm 58 years old. I'm a boomer. I for all of the good and bad that comes with that, and I will just tell you, it drives me insane when I see somebody in my age group walking around a grocery store talking with their phone on speakerphone. I have heard some of the most incredible stuff people are talking about, like intimate medical stuff or
Totally
other kinds of intimate stuff that nobody else ought to be hearing. And you just think to yourself, well, I mean, I am almost speechless when I see it. And I've seen it so many times, I've lost count of it, right? So I'm really glad that you're asking parents to think about what their behaviors are like too. Because it's true, we model behavior, whether we know it or not. We model behavior for our kids, and so hopefully, we can model good behavior for our children. You also mentioned sexting, and I really want to ask you about this because, again, as a political reporter, I've seen a lot of emphasis on this issue in recent years, and this one is a really concerning one because I know things become popular with teens. And they may not have a grasp of the ramifications of that, particularly if they're a certain age. The law looks at you very differently when you're 18 plus or even close to it now in a lot of states, and particularly when it comes to sexting. What is it that you, and for anyone who may not know what we're talking about, it's when you send anything, pictures or overtly sexual content to via text to somebody. If you're underage, there's a lot of states now where that can get you in a lifetime of trouble, like having to register as a sex offender and that kind of thing. It is not fun and games. So tell me what you're telling kids in this book about this issue of sexting.
So first, I very clearly say sending, having, looking at pictures of someone under the age of 18 is illegal. Like, even if you didn't send it, somebody sent it to you and it's on your phone, you could be charged with it. That is a crime. So I try to put some fear into them and some seriousness into it. It's not just you and your, girlfriend or boyfriend, sending a cute picture of you naked, which I can't even believe that's a thing, but that is a thing. That's what they're doing. That's their way of flirting, believe it or not. That's not even in relationships. That's even can be just flirting. And so I try and explain to them, like, this is not just a fun and games with your partner, with someone you're flirting with. This is an actual crime. And sometimes what happens in a relationship, you break up and nothing is private. So you might have said, I'll keep this private, and so did your partner. But then, 6 months down the line, you get in a horrible fight. And the next thing you know, that picture is being shared through the entire school. So absolutely nothing is private under any circumstances. Everything can be copied. Everything can be shared. You have to know that when you send something. Number two, that it's illegal and that there are legal consequences for that. I talk about an example in the book even of there was a case of a woman, I think it was in LA, who took a picture of a naked woman in the gym and posted it, basically saying, if I have to look at this, if I can't unsee this, neither can you, or something like so mean, but also like so dumb and illegal. And she basically was found guilty and had legal consequences. So I think this is an important issue that kids need to think about more deeply. But as parents, we do have to understand that this is the way they flirt and communicate. And we have to teach them other ways to manage that, or even what to do when someone asks your kid, like, send me a photo. Like, how do you handle that? How do you say no when they keep asking over and over and over again? Like, what should you do? How should you handle it?
Yeah, I remember that situation that you described. Yes, that I think we all felt a little appalled that somebody could be just so awful, but it's 2022. Nothing shocks me anymore. I also wanted to ask you about bullying, because we know a lot of bullying happens now via texting and phone calls and that kind of thing. Can I presume you also address bullying in this book?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remind kids about what texting is for and what it's not for, and what cyberbullying really is. Even just gossiping about someone, or making a fake profile about somebody, or mean comments on their social media, like, all of that is a way of bullying. So we've done a lot with bullying in schools, but now we really need to talk more about cyberbullying.
Yeah. This is just maybe a perfunctory question, but there's so much flack now over what ends up being available for kids to read in schools or libraries. And I know you didn't write this to get it into the schools, but because you talk about things like sexting, are you concerned at all that you might get some pushback from parents who don't want you to even talk about that topic?
So originally I was very careful of the way I address sexting and pornography in the book. I really am just offering a definition and what not to do and why. And what I have found, actually, surprisingly, is that even very conservative parents want this anti-sexting conversation. They want this pornography discussion, and they don't even know how, or what tools, or what to say after don't do it. They don't really know how to have the conversation. So actually, I found that there are a lot of parents who I thought would be very against this, even just addressing the topic, are very interested in having that put forth.
Well, that's great. I'm really glad to hear that, because I think we could all agree. And one of the real challenges right now is having discussions about things that require discussion, and efforts being made to keep us from having discussions about these sensitive topics. It doesn't help to just go out there blindly ignorant. I don't want to keep you too long, but I did want to ask you about the issue of anxiety, because we've been talking a lot about it. I mean, these are tough times for kids, and we've just been talking about a lot of things just as it relates to cell phones. But, as we know, anyone who's been paying attention to the news knows, it's a tough time for a kid to go to school. go to the mall, a lot of stuff going on. What message do you have maybe for kids beyond this specific issue of cell phones and digital care? And I ask because I know you are a social worker and a parenting expert. I know this is an opportunity to address one specific part of it, but I know you probably have some thoughts on this general malaise that we think that our kids are probably facing right now. What are some of your thoughts in that regard?
I think there is such a pervasive amount of depression and anxiety among teens that sometimes it feels like this is just normal, but it's not normal. And kids don't have to just tough it out and have a really hard time just doing basic tasks, going places for kids nowadays. That's just not something that they do. They don't socialize, they don't date, they don't get their licenses on time. They're living in a lot of access online, but very sheltered in terms of interacting with the world. And I think that they need help. Treatment helps, medication helps. So that's really my message for parents and kids, is that, like, this is not normal. Just because, so many kids, are feeling the same thing, that's not okay. We still have to address it. And I also think that as parents, we should be enabling our kids by doing so much more of a focus on the adulting skills: cooking, driving, calling a doctor, filling out a form, opening a bank account. Like, these are skills that kids are just not developing, and they're sending them off to college and they're wholly unprepared for what they're getting to. And very often it doesn't go very well. And we're also losing kids. Like, kids are actually, attempting and succeeding in suicide, and that is preventable. So, we need to prepare our kids. And I remember when my daughter was like a couple years leading into college, I went to see a parenting expert. I think her name is Julie Lithcott-Hames, and she was a Stanford dean, and she wrote a lot about adulting. And she said the job of parents is to put ourselves out of a job. And that really stuck with me, even though I also do this for a living. Like, it really made me think about, what am I doing to set my kid up for success? Like, sure, I may enjoy helping them out, cooking and doing laundry or whatever it may be, the nice things I try and do for my kids, but I'm actually damaging them by not really teaching them those skills. So it became like a joke. My daughter would say, like, I can't open this cheese stick. And I would say, do you want to open cheese sticks in college? You need to learn these skills for yourself. But it worked. She really is very capable. I know I'm sending her out into the world being confident. And if she has a problem, we're going to address it with mental health or whatever it may be, because I've explained that, like, this is not something you have to just, like I said, tough it out. We need to address these things for kids to help them out.
Well, that's great advice. A quick anecdotal story. My wife was at the post office over the weekend, and a young man who she said was probably somewhere between 19 and 21, somewhere in that age, asked her for help. He had no idea how to mail a letter. And since there was nobody working at the post, she was just there checking my mother-in-law's post office box. She had to help this kid figure out how to get the right package for his, or the right envelope and all these things. And there was nothing wrong with him. He just had never mailed a letter in his entire
Nobody told him.
life, and no one had ever shown him how to do it. I mean, we take so many things for granted in the modern world, but you're right. Maybe opening that cheese stick is not that easy. Maybe we should teach them how to do things. It's kind of crazy. Well, I really appreciate you taking time. I have one more question for you. I always like to end on a fun question. And what it is I will say I have the magic power to put you together with any one of the following three people for any kind of event you want: dinner, drinks, conversation, what have you. Which one of these three folks would you choose and why? And the options I'll give you are the late Steve Jobs, of course, founded Apple; Dr. Thomas Starzl, who is known as the father of organ transplant surgery; and Jane Fonda, who I don't have to tell anyone who Jane Fonda is. You have those three folks you could choose from. Who would you choose to have a conversation with, and why?
So I was definitely thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know, because the first two were so tempting. But Jane Fonda, 100%. I absolutely love Jane Fonda. First of all, I think it's so rare that you get to hear from a powerful and interesting woman. You know, the voices are often men. So for me as a woman, it would be amazing to speak to a woman about, you know, what she's seen, what she's done. I think she's funny. I think she's a firecracker. I like On Golden Pond was like one of the most important movies of my life. 9 to 5. I just love her. So I'm easy, Jane Fonda. Thank you. I'll expect you to set that up for next week.
Yeah, I know. I have set myself up with a high tasker, haven't I? Well, Catherine, thank you very much, and I appreciate both you coming on the show and this book. I really do think this is something that's necessary in our world today. It's getting harder and harder for kids to get maybe the kind of good advice, mentoring, what have you, in areas like this. And it really is you know, it's such a double-edged sword. I mean, it's this little massive supercomputer in our pocket, and that's great, but it can also be really problematic if not watched closely. So anyway, good job on that. We really appreciate it. For everyone else out there, if you haven't hit the subscribe button, now would be a great time to do it. Every week I come on with somebody a lot smarter than me who has really good stuff to say about their book and about writing and about whatever is going on in the world. So until then, I am Rich Eisen. This is The Open Mic. I'll leave you with one final thought. You know, tomorrow is not promised to any of us, so make today count. And we'll see you next time on The Open Mic.